In the year 1066, England was turned upside down. It was a year of crisis, of 3 kings, 2 invasions, and 1 battle that would define a nation for 1,000 years. This is the story of the Norman Conquest. So, how did this all kick off? Let's rewind a bit. Our story really begins with the Vikings. Not the ones raiding England, but the ones who settled in France. In 911, a Viking leader named Rollo struck a deal with the French king. You give us this land and we'll stop other Vikings from sailing up the river to bother you. This land became Normandy, and these Northmen, or Normans, quickly adapted. They became French-speaking Christians, but they never lost their Viking edge. Fast forward to the 11th century. The King of England is Edward the Confessor. His mom, Emma of Normandy. Edward actually grew up in exile in Normandy, and as king, he surrounded himself with Norman friends and advisors. This didn't sit well with the powerful English nobles, especially a guy named Godwin, the Earl of Wessex. Now, Edward had no children. Seeing a power vacuum on the horizon, he might have quietly hinted to his distant cousin, William, the Duke of Normandy, that the English throne could be his for the taking. Then, in January 1066, King Edward dies. The English council, the Witenagemot, doesn't wait around. They immediately elect the most powerful man in the kingdom as their new king, Harold Godwinson, son of Edward's old rival. But Harold wasn't the only one with a claim. Across the Channel, William of Normandy was furious. He claimed Edward had promised him the throne, and that Harold had even sworn an oath to support him. To make things even more complicated, over in Norway, King Harald Hardrada, whose name literally means hard ruler, also threw his hat in the ring, citing a dusty old treaty. With 3 men claiming 1 crown, England was about to become a battlefield. Harold Godwinson knew trouble was brewing. He positioned his army on the south coast, waiting for William's invasion. But the first threat came from his own family. His exiled brother Tostig teamed up with Harald Hardrada of Norway. In September, a massive Norwegian fleet of over 300 ships landed in the north of England. The local English forces tried to stop them at the Battle of Fulford but were completely overwhelmed. Hearing the news, King Harold had to make a brutal choice. He force-marched his army nearly 200 miles north in just 9 days, an incredible feat. On September 25th, he launched a surprise attack on the unsuspecting Norwegians at Stamford Bridge. The battle was a bloodbath. Both Hardrada and Tostig were killed. The Norwegian army was so utterly destroyed that out of 300 ships, only 24 were needed to carry the survivors home. It was a stunning victory for Harold, but his army was battered, exhausted, and a long, long way from the south coast. And just 3 days later, the wind changed. While Harold was celebrating his victory in the north, William of Normandy's invasion fleet finally set sail. They landed completely unopposed at Pevensey in Sussex. William set up a base at Hastings and started raiding the local countryside, lands that belonged to Harold's own family. It was a calculated move, designed to provoke the English king. And it worked. As soon as he heard the news, Harold raced his exhausted army back down south. He gathered what fresh troops he could in London, but many of his best soldiers were still recovering, or buried, in the north. On October 14, 1066, the 2 armies finally met on a ridge just outside Hastings. Harold's army, made up of elite housecarls and militia, formed a near-impenetrable shield wall at the top of the hill. They were all on foot, armed with spears, axes, and swords. William's army was a mix of archers, infantry, and, crucially, armored knights on horseback. For hours, the battle raged. The Norman knights charged up the hill, only to be thrown back time and again by the disciplined English shield wall. The Norman archers fired volleys of arrows, but they just bounced off the wall of shields. At one point, a rumor spread that William had been killed. His left flank broke and ran. Seeing their chance, some of the English soldiers broke formation and charged down the hill after them. It was a trap. William, who was very much alive, rallied his knights, turned and cut the pursuing English to pieces. The Normans allegedly used this trick, a feigned retreat, 2 more times, slowly chipping away at Harold's wall. The battle lasted all day, a brutal, grinding affair. But as evening approached, the decisive moment came. King Harold was killed. How exactly? We don't know for sure. The famous Bayeux tapestry shows a figure with an arrow in his eye, but some say that was a later addition. Whatever the cause, with their king and his 2 brothers all dead on the field, the English resistance finally crumbled. The battle was over. William was the victor. After Hastings, William marched towards London. The remaining English leaders tried to rally around a young prince, Edgar Atheling, but their spirit was broken. They surrendered, and on Christmas Day, 1066, William the Conqueror was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey. But his fight was far from over. For the next decade, England burned. Rebellions flared up across the country, often supported by the Danes. William responded with ruthless efficiency. He built castles everywhere. Stark wooden fortresses at first, later replaced by stone keeps like the Tower of London, to dominate the landscape and intimidate the populace. The most infamous example of his brutality was the harrying of the North. In 1069, a major uprising in the north, backed by the Danes, captured the city of York. William's response was apocalyptic. During the winter, his army marched through Yorkshire and the surrounding areas, systematically destroying everything. They burned villages, slaughtered livestock, and salted the earth. The goal was to cause a famine so severe that the region could never support another rebellion. It worked. Chronicles from the time speak of widespread starvation and even cannibalism. It was an act of state-sponsored terror that left scars for generations. By 1075, after crushing one last revolt by some of his own disgruntled earls, William's grip on England was absolute. So, how did one man and his army manage to control an entire country that hated them? First, land. William declared that all the land in England now belonged to him personally. He then took it from the English lords and gave it to his loyal Norman followers. By 1086, just 20 years after the conquest, only about 5% of land was still held by Englishmen. This created a brand new, French-speaking aristocracy that owed everything to the king. Second, control. The Normans were brilliant administrators. They kept the sophisticated Anglo-Saxon system of government, with its shires and sheriffs, but put their own people in charge. And to know exactly what he now owned, William commissioned an unprecedented survey of his new kingdom. This became the Domesday Book, a staggeringly detailed record of every piece of land, every village, and every resource in England. It was a tool of control unlike anything else in Europe. The Norman Conquest changed England forever. A new ruling class took over, and with them came a new language, Norman French. For the next 300 years, French was the language of the court, of law, and of power. English became the language of the common folk, but it survived, absorbing thousands of French words in the process, words like government, justice, and liberty. This is why modern English has such a rich and varied vocabulary. Society itself was transformed. The old Anglo-Saxon aristocracy was wiped out. Many fled to Scotland, Ireland, or even as far as the Byzantine Empire, where they served as elite mercenaries in the Varangian Guard. One of the more positive changes was the end of slavery. The Normans, for both religious and economic reasons, phased out the practice, which had been common in Anglo-Saxon England. The legacy of 1066 is complex and still debated today. For centuries, people spoke of the Norman yoke, the idea that the conquest destroyed a freer, more equal Anglo-Saxon society and replaced it with an oppressive feudal system. Historians today see it as a radical turning point that violently dragged England into the mainstream of European culture and politics. It was the end of Anglo-Saxon England and the birth of a new nation, forged in the fire and fury of invasion. The events of 1066 didn't just change who sat on the throne. They remade the identity, language, and destiny of England itself. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more. We'll see you in the next one. The visuals within this presentation are crafted to enrich your understanding, serving as artistic interpretations and contextual aids rather than direct factual representations. Their purpose is to illuminate the narrative and deepen your engagement with the historical backdrop. Join our growing community of history enthusiasts. Hit the subscribe button, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support keeps history alive.